Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the suppressed pistol pressed against Lord Vane's temple, the cold metal creating a stark contrast against his sweating, pale skin. But it was the silence of the cathedral that screamed the loudest. There was no bride. There was no groom in white. There was only Viktor Dragunov, the demon of the north, standing at the altar in a tuxedo that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, his pheromones rolling off him in waves of suffocating, burnt cedar and gunpowder. He didn't look like a man left at the altar. He looked like an executioner who had finally lost his patience. The pews were filled with the terrified elite of the underworld, witnessing the humiliation of the most dangerous alpha in the city. Silas Vane, the prized Omega, the jewel of the family, had run. He had chosen a pauper over a king, leaving his family to face the monster alone. "My patience," Viktor said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the chests of everyone present, "has expired, Lord Vane. You promised me a union. You promised me the ports. Instead, you give me an empty church." Viktor's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the safety clicking off echoed like a thunderclap. "Wait!" The cry came from the shadows of the vestibule. It wasn't the melodious, practiced voice of Silas. It was thinner, shakier, but laced with a desperate steel. A figure stepped into the aisle. Elias Vane, the spare, the younger brother, the Omega who had always been too quiet, too plain, too invisible compared to Silas's radiant beauty. He wore an ill-fitting suit, likely grabbed from a closet in haste, his chestnut hair tousled, his chest heaving. "Don't kill him," Elias gasped, walking forward, his legs trembling visibly. The contract states a union between the Dragunov and Vane bloodlines. It doesn't specify Silas. Viktor slowly turned his head, his eyes shards of freezing blue ice, locking onto Elias. He lowered the gun by an inch, intrigued by the audacity of the mouse walking into the lion's den. "And you are offering yourself?" Viktor sneered, his lip curling. "You? The shadow? I ordered a diamond, and you offer me a piece of glass." Elias stopped at the foot of the altar. The Alpha's aura was crushing, a physical weight that made his Omega instincts scream to submit, to bare his neck, to flee. But Elias dug his fingernails into his palms until they bled. "The ports belong to the Vane name," Elias said, his voice gaining strength. "Marry me and they are yours. Kill my father, and you start a war with the council that will cost you half your territory. I am the only logical choice, Viktor." Silence stretched heavy and thick. Viktor studied the trembling boy. He saw the fear, yes, but beneath the fear he saw a frantic intelligence, a survival instinct. Silas had run like a coward. Elias had walked into the line of fire. Viktor holstered the gun. The click was the loudest sound in the world. He stepped down from the altar, towering over Elias, blocking out the light. He reached out, his gloved hand gripping Elias's chin, forcing his head up. "Very well," Viktor whispered, the sound dark and promising pain. "I will take the glass. But do not think this is a mercy, little mouse. You are entering a cage from which there is no escape. By morning, you might wish I had just shot your father." The Dragunov estate was not a home. It was a fortress carved from obsidian and steel, perched on the cliffs overlooking the churning gray ocean. The wind howled against the windows, a constant reminder of the isolation. Elias sat on the edge of the massive four-poster bed, his hands folded in his lap. He had been stripped of his old clothes and dressed in a silk robe that felt too expensive against his skin. It had been 3 hours since the ceremony. A hasty signing of papers in the sacristy while his father wept with relief and shame. The door opened. Viktor walked in. He had discarded his jacket. His sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked by faint, jagged scars. He didn't look at Elias. He went straight to the liquor cabinet and poured a glass of amber whiskey. "You can sleep on the floor," Viktor said, taking a sip. "Or the couch." I don't care. Just don't expect to share this bed. I don't touch charity cases. Elias flinched, the words stinging more than he expected. He knew this was a business transaction. He knew he wasn't desired. But the open disdain was a cold bucket of water. I didn't do this for you, Elias said softly. I did it to save my family. Your family sold you, Victor scoffed, turning around to lean against the mahogany desk. Silas is halfway to the border with his lover, and your father gave you to a monster to save his own skin. You have no family, Elias. You are property. I am your husband, Elias corrected, standing up. The movement made him dizzy, the sheer pressure of Victor's presence overwhelming him, but he held his ground. And I am capable. I managed the logistics for the Vane ports for 3 years while Silas was busy attending galas. I know the routes. I know the captains. I can be useful to you. Victor paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. He narrowed his eyes. You ran the logistics? My father took the credit, Elias admitted, looking down. But the ledgers were mine. Victor set the glass down. He crossed the room, his stride predatory, closing the distance until he was looming over Elias. He inhaled deeply, smelling the scent of the omega. Rainwater and faint vanilla, subtle, not cloying like Silas's heavy rose perfume. Prove it, Victor growled. Tomorrow, you will come to the office. If you are lying, I will throw you to my wolves. If you are telling the truth, well, perhaps you won't be entirely useless. The weeks that followed were a blur of high-stakes tension. Elias wasn't treated as a spouse. He was treated as an overworked secretary with a target on his back. Victor was a demanding taskmaster, ruthless and precise. But Elias met every challenge. He reorganized the shipping schedules, cut costs by 15%, and even identified a mole in the accounting department that Victor's men had missed for months. Slowly, the atmosphere in the estate began to shift. The guards, who had initially sneered at the replacement bride, began to nod respectfully when Elias passed. The staff started coming to him for decisions. But the distance between him and Victor remained a chasm of ice. It broke on a rainy Tuesday. They were in the back of Victor's armored limousine, returning from a negotiation with a rival syndicate. The meeting had been tense. The rival alpha, Don Moretti, had spent the entire time eyeing Elias with a lecherous grin, making crude comments about trying out the spare. Victor had remained stoic, but the air in the car was thick with suppressed rage. You should have let me wait outside, Elias murmured, looking out at the rain-streaked window. And show weakness? Victor snapped. You are a Dragunov now. You sit where I tell you to sit. Suddenly, the car swerved violently. An explosion rocked the asphalt, flipping the heavy vehicle onto its side. Metal screamed as the limousine skidded, sparks flying like fireworks. Elias was thrown against the ceiling, his world spinning into darkness. When he blinked his eyes open, he was hanging suspended by his seatbelt. Smoke filled the cabin. Victor, he coughed. The alpha was slumped next to him, unconscious, a nasty gash on his forehead bleeding profusely. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Elias's chest. He heard shouting outside. Gunfire. Moretti's men. Wake up, Elias hissed, fumbling with his buckle. He dropped down, crawling over the shattered glass to reach Victor. He slapped the alpha's cheek. Victor, get up. Victor groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were hazy, unfocused. Concussion. They're coming, Elias whispered. He managed to unclip Victor, the heavy body of the alpha slumping onto him. Elias was small, but adrenaline was a potent drug. He kicked open the warped back door. The rain was torrential. Bullets pinged off the armored chassis. Elias dragged Victor out, pulling him into the cover of a nearby alleyway just as the limousine erupted into a fireball, the explosion knocking them both to the wet pavement. Victor was barely conscious, his pheromones erratic, smelling of distressed ozone and blood. Leave me, he rasped, trying to push Elias away. Run. Shut up, Elias grunted, hoisting Victor's arm over his shoulder. "I'm not Silas. I don't run." Elias dragged a man twice his size through the labyrinthine backstreets of the city. He used every ounce of his knowledge of the city's layout, knowledge he had gained from years of managing delivery routes, to evade the pursuers. He hid them in a derelict warehouse, binding Victor's head wound with strips of his own silk shirt, shivering in the cold dampness while he held the Alpha close to share body heat. For hours they sat in the dark. Victor drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand gripping Elias's wrist with a bruising force, anchoring himself to the only source of warmth in the void. When Victor finally woke with clarity, it was dawn. His security team had found them, triangulating their position. But Victor didn't move to leave immediately. He looked at Elias, who was asleep against a crate, bruised, dirty, his expensive suit ruined, looking nothing like a prince and everything like a warrior. Victor reached out, his thumb tracing the smudge of grease on Elias's cheek. For the first time, the ice in his eyes melted, replaced by a burning, possessive fire. The dynamic shifted. It wasn't subtle, it was an earthquake. Victor became a shadow at Elias's back. If anyone looked at Elias with disrespect, they disappeared. The separate bedrooms were abolished. Victor didn't force intimacy, but he demanded proximity. He needed to smell Elias, to touch him, to ensure he was there. The enemy's phase had bled out in that alleyway. Now it was something far more dangerous. It was obsession. But peace in the underworld is a fragile illusion. 3 months into their marriage, the doors to the Dragunov estate burst open during a gala. The music stopped. Standing there, flanked by federal agents, was Silas Vane. He looked haggard. The romance with his pauper had evidently soured. He wore a look of repentant martyrdom, tears glistening in his eyes as he pointed a finger at Victor. "I was coerced," Silas cried out, his voice ringing through the hall. "I was forced to run to protect myself. This man, he is a monster, and he is holding my brother hostage." The room murmured. The agents stepped forward. "Victor Dragunov, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of kidnapping and extortion, based on the testimony of your fiancé, Silas Vane." Victor didn't move. He stood in the center of the room, a glass of champagne in his hand, looking bored. He glanced at Elias, who was standing beside him, pale as a sheet. "Hostage," Victor repeated, his voice dry. Silas rushed forward, reaching for Elias. "Elias, oh my poor brother, come here. Tell them how he forced you." Elias looked at Silas. He saw the brother he had idolized for years, the brother who had left him to die, the brother who was now back because he realized he had thrown away a kingdom for a cottage, and he wanted his crown back. Silas didn't care about Elias. He cared that Elias was wearing the Dragunov diamonds. Elias stepped back, away from Silas's grasping hands. He moved closer to Victor, his shoulder brushing against the Alpha's arm. "I am not a hostage," Elias said, his voice ringing clear and true. "I am his husband." Silas's face twisted. "Don't be stupid, Elias. You're the spare. You were just the placeholder until I could come back with the authorities to free us both." "Free us?" Elias laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You left us. You put a gun to our father's head by your absence." "Victor didn't save me from you, Silas. I saved myself from you." Elias turned to the federal agents. "My brother is a liar and a deserter. I entered this marriage of my own free will to honor a contract he breached. If you want to arrest someone for extortion, arrest the man who tried to sell his family's safety for a plane ticket." Victor's hand snaked around Elias's waist, pulling him flush against his chest. The possessiveness was palpable, a heavy weight in the air. Victor looked at Silas with a terrifying calmness. "You heard the Dragunov," Victor said. "Get out of my house, before I forget that I am a civilized man." Silas turned pale, realizing his gamble had failed. The agents, sensing the legal quicksand and the lethal intent radiating from Victor, began to back away. As the doors closed on the sputtering Silas, The room remained silent. Victor turned Elias to face him, ignoring the hundreds of watching eyes. "You called yourself a Dragunov," Victor murmured, his eyes searching Elias's face. "I am," Elias whispered. "Good," Victor growled. He leaned down, capturing Elias's lips in a kiss that was searing, claiming, and undeniably final. It wasn't the kiss of a business partner. It was the kiss of a man who had found the other half of his soul in the wreckage of a disaster. Later that night, the walls of the master bedroom witnessed the final destruction of the contract. There was no coercion, only the feverish heat of two people who had danced around death and found life in each other. Victor pinned Elias to the mattress, his hands interlacing with Elias's, the scars on his arms pressing against Elias's smooth skin. "I wanted the diamond," Victor rasped against Elias's neck, marking him, biting down gently to taste the vanilla and rain. "I was a fool. Diamonds are cold. You are the steel that holds the world together." Elias arched into the touch, his fingers tangling in Victor's dark hair. "And you," Elias breathed, "are the only one who ever saw me." The spare had not only taken the crown, he had tamed the king. And as the rain lashed against the windows of the fortress, the demon of the north held his husband tight, knowing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone in the dark. And that is how the overlooked shadow eclipsed the sun. If you enjoyed seeing Elias rise from a pawn to a queen, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have taken Silas back? Or would you have left him to rot like Elias did? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,